Greetings, Saberites! Anonymous here. Welcome to the Sword Lab. Today, I wanted to go over one of the things that I talked about in a previous video about fear, which is different types of sparring weapon. We talk about the dynamic between safety and realism and trying to match that, get a good balance between those two things. And one of the ways that we do it is through a weapon. And we want our weapons to be able to do what we expect them to do. We want them to be safe, and we want them to feel kind of authentic most of the time. Now, this is not necessarily always the case. If you're in a sport like fencing, the weapon is very, very much designed specifically for that sport. And so all of its qualities are going to be geared towards that. So they're going to have their own kind of criteria. But we'll go over some of the basic ones here. Okay, so the first dynamic that we got to talk about is the fear of being hit and the fear of hitting the other person. So while we want our weapons to feel very realistic, we don't really want them to be realistic, because in that case we would be imparting lethal force to our opponent. So we don't necessarily want to do that. There's a few different types of sparring weapons out there. We'll go over a couple of them. So the first type of sparring weapon is made of wood. This is a bokken. I don't have many wood weapons anymore. They are very popular and very often used in Chinese martial arts, but as you'll see in a second here, once I got into the steel and the poly and synthetics, then I kind of put this aside. Now, the reason for that is, while it does tend to have a good weight, and depending on what type of wood and how it's carved and all of that, you can get them very, very historically accurate. But there's a couple of things with them. Number one, they're just a stick. So they hurt, and they can still deliver a lethal blow. There are accounts in history of people killing people with wooden swords. So that's a drawback in my opinion. The other thing is that they do not flex at all. They are completely rigid, so thrusting, not a great idea. Very unsafe in that kind of thing. The other thing is depending on the quality of wood and type of wood that you get, as you use it, it will tend to splinter or dent after a while, and therefore they are not as permanent as some of the other ones that we're going to look at here are. And hence, they're often called wooden wasters, because that's what you would do with them. Just fence with them until they broke, get another one. Okay, so after that, we have poly weapons. Now these are synthetic plastic. I'm not exactly sure what kind here. So they can flex, right? In that way. These are, I want to say that they're polypropylene, because that's what they feel like. So they're softish, and there. Now they do move pretty well. They balance off quite nicely. The drawback to them, as you can probably see, is they're very soft. So they're a little whippy. And you get lots of kind of flex in play. These less so, because they're a little bit thicker down here, but these Jian, which we have used for a while, have been okay. but they're really very insubstantial in the blade, so they're good for thrusting and all of that. But if you go up against a heavier weapon, they can pretty much just power right through this. So there's the drawback to that. Now, poly weapons tend to be lighter than wood weapons. That's a good and a bad thing depending on where you get it and what type. We're going to go look at the nylon ones here, which are a little bit of a step up from the poly ones. So now these are made of nylon. These I got from Purple Heart Armory. This is their synthetic Jian. They have lots of more European weapons than they do Chinese weapons, but made of the same material. This is very good stuff. It has the weight of metal. If you close your eyes, it very much feels like a real sword. The way they make it, they balance perfectly, really, right there, and they're very, very responsive. They do flex a little bit, but not so much as the other ones, as the poly ones. Right? So it really gives a really good steel type of feeling. Now, this is a one-handed Jian here, and I'll show you. This is the first version of the two-handed here, and this balances a little bit closer to the hilt here, because it really wasn't intended to be like this, which is another story. And I put a heavy pommel on it here. The reason I put a heavy pommel on it, which brought the balance point back, is because without this pommel, this sword is fairly light, so it doesn't really feel good when we're moving. It's kind of a myth, I have found, that a totally lighter weapon is going to be very advantageous to you. If it's too light, I find that you end up using too much of your own power to move it around because it doesn't have enough mass to start throwing around. But that's a different thing. Now, they did improve it to here. This is the two-handed, and so this balance is much better out there. And it has a little bit of a different pommel and guard there, but still very, very good. Like I said, very, very realistic feeling, very realistic in match play, all of that. Drawback to them, they do not flex in the thrust. They sort of flex here, right? But you end up imparting quite a lot of force into the other person before it starts to bend. So thrusting is very uncomfortable in this. I'm not going to necessarily say dangerous, because these are relatively insubstantial and their tips are nice and rounded. But still not comfortable to get stabbed with one of these guys. So there. Now, the last part we have here is steel. Now, steel comes in a variety of ways. The most basic kind is just a blunted sword, right? Now, this is a little bit different than just a blunted sword. This is a sparring sword, so it has a flexible tip up here, right? If you can see that, there is a kind of a flattened tip up there to prevent from anything like that. But it has the full blade geometry here. Now, we're going to get into the other types of sparring swords here. So, but with most blunted swords like this, they are heavy. And that is because the edge on an unsharpened sword is very thick. When you sharpen a sword, you take away a lot of material, and that gives it a specific type of balance and feel. In order to get this to balance kind of correctly, but also they tend to bring it really close to the guard here, is the pommel has to be really, really heavy. So this tends to be a little slower in what's going on. And even though it has the correct blade geometry of a sharpened sword, like I said, it's heavier, so it doesn't exactly move or feel like a sharpened full-on sword. Now, to combat that, we have these. Now, these are generally today in HEMA called Federschwert or fetters. I'm not sure that there's a official name for them. Some of them have been called different things over the years. Some of the older ones would have a scalloped tip, making the whole thing look a lot like a feather. So that's kind of where the name comes from, I believe. If I'm wrong about that, don't string me up. But anyway, the reason they have this shape, they have a narrower blade, and they have these things here, what they call the schilt, right? And the schilt comes down to about the width of what the blade would be, and then it kind of narrows up there. And the reason that is so that these swords, put this down here, these swords can more closely mimic what it feels like with a sharpened sword. So while it has the blunt edge, which isn't going to, do a lot of damage to somebody wearing gear, it is narrower to give the same type of idea of that sharpened edge. It also has this one has a rolled tip. The other ones have the flattened kind of tip there. That is to obviously protect you from thrusts. They are not very flexible. This one, less flexible than this one. But that translates, of course, into stability of the blade when you're working, right? So these are obviously they're used in HEMA extensively for competitions, and they really are a wonderful training sword. They feel very much like the real thing, as much as we can tell. I've never actually fought anybody with a real sharp weapon with the intent to kill, so and I hope never to have that opportunity. Anyway, but that's the reason there. Obviously, steel, you either have to go slow or you got to wear gear, because steel and a steel longsword impacts quite a punch. So that is one drawback. You're going to definitely need more gear to play with steel than you will any of the other things, the exception of wood or something like that. But that's kind of the basics. Now, hopefully, we're going to see more and more steel weapons come out for other types of martial arts, so that we can get more kind of playing all together. Now, one type of weapon that I did not cover here, and that is because I don't own any. I have used some in the past, and I'm not a huge fan of them, and that is the foam sparring weapons. These are not necessarily the boffers. Okay, so you have the boffers where people are just really putting a PVC pipe through there and 2 pieces of foam, whacking each other with them. Not those. There are foam weapons that make an attempt to become more realistically weighted and balanced, but still provide a soft impacting surface in which to use. Now, of course, the benefit to that is you can wear less gear. You don't have to wear so much padding and all of that. The drawback, in my opinion, to that is the interaction between the 2 blades. With everything from wood, poly, to steel, these things tend to hit with a lot of vibration, and they slide, and they do certain things, which I did not see happening with the foam weapons. I didn't like the way that they kind of bounced off of each other, the way they felt. Now, I'm not going to say that they're totally wrong to practice with. I definitely prefer armoring the person more than padding the weapon. But that's just me. Sometimes you have, other considerations. They're very popular in Asia, where they have very, very hot weather. So wearing a whole lot of gear is very, very uncomfortable. So there's that. Foam weapons, I'm not a big fan of them. I know a lot of people that are, but there you go. I don't have any with me. So that's just a kind of little overview of the different types of sparring weapons we've got there, mostly swords that can be used in sparring. Obviously with anything you do, you want to get good instruction, proper instruction, wear all the proper safety gear. I mentioned that gear and rules and weapons are all different safety features. They should all be used together to create one type of thing. Good safe practice that focuses on practicality, functionality, and all of that. So that's where I'm going to stand on that, and that is where I will leave you today. So take that to heart. Check out Purple Heart Armory. They've got some nice weapons. Cult of Athena, of course, has some great stuff there, and Black Fencer, I know, in the UK and over in Europe. And I know there's lots and lots more stuff that I am not thinking of right now, but I will try to find it and put it in the description for anybody interested. So, until next time, have a great day. Happy saving.